Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. So today we are going to continue our comprehensive AWS journey. Now we are going to look at the next topic, Lambda invocations. AWS Lambda invocations, right? We have two types of invocations. One is sync and async. So in this slide we will cover synchronous invocations. So what is synchronous invocation in Lambda? And what is synchronous invocation of Lambda also we can say. So whenever we invoke the lambda, we have to wait until to get response. Simple. So you invoke a lambda from some source and you have to wait for the response. So you need a response from the lambda. You need a result from the lambda. In such scenarios, we call it as an synchronous invocation of lambda. So until we get the result from the lambda, we can't proceed further. So in such scenarios, we call the invocation as synchronous invocation. Okay, so any retries and error handling must be handled on client side. Since we are relying on Lambda, if Lambda didn't give the proper result as we expected, right? We got an error from the Lambda. Then we need to again retry from our end to get the response from the Lambda. So synchronous invocation should be handled like this. We have to configure our retry strategies like exponential backoff in the client side. Okay. So what are the few examples of synchronous invocation of Lambda was console. From the console, we do an synchronous invocation so that we'll get the result. And CLA, definitely CLA, we can use CLA to invoke the Lambda to get a result and use by using SDK also. And also we have few other services like API gateway, application load balancer, etc. to use those services to invoke Lambda in a synchronous way. Now we'll take a look at some examples. For example, we have console. So console or SDK or CLA as I mentioned earlier, we make a request to the Lambda. Lambda will do some processing and it will send response to back to the particular source. That is a synchronous invocation example. Otherwise, the other examples like we have clients from the globe and they sent a request to the API gateway. From the API gateway, we invoke the Lambda. Now, this invocation is synchronous because the API gateway is waiting for the Lambda's response. Once the response received to the API gateway, and again this response sent back to the clients. So that's about synchronous. And now we'll see few of the services which will be used for doing synchronous invocation on Lambda. So we have this application load balancer, API gateway, and CloudFront. We can also use Amazon S3 batch. So these are usually called user invoked services, right? So application load balancer will be invoked by a client. API gateway also invoked by a client. CloudFront also invoked by a client. Batch also. And some of the service invoked like Cognito, step functions, and Amazon Kinesis data Firehose comes under service invoked synchronous Lambda functions, right? We can use the services also invoke Lambda functions in a synchronous way. Now we have seen the theory part. We will dive into the AWS console and see how to invoke a Lambda synchronously. Okay, now we'll try to do some hands-on. So how we are going to do, we'll see. So now I am opening my Lambda function, which is earlier created. So this is my Lambda function. Here I am using a dark theme. Okay, don't get confused if you are getting the white theme. I changed the theme to dark. If you want, you can also change, right, dark to light, light to dark, but I prefer dark theme, so I am using the dark theme. Okay, now here if I click on this test button, we are sending in invoking a lambda and immediately we are getting a response back. So this is how we will invoke a lambda from the console. And for more precisely how to invoke this lambda from the CLA, we'll have a look at it. So for that we can use this AWS Cloud Shell, right? And from the AWS Cloud Shell also we can do invocation to the lambda, right? How to do that? First we'll show how to check the AWS version here. AWS hyphen version will check whether it's work or not. And yes, so it is showing the AWS version. Now we'll see how to invoke and how to invoke lambda using CLA. So we'll go to this AWS documentation and find out how to invoke an AWS lambda. So we'll use we'll use this thing and go to our CLA and paste. So it is asking like this. So my function name. So what is my function name? I need to check. So my function name is this. I'm just copying my lambda function name and keeping here like this. And after that, we're providing this binary format name Bob. So I'm giving my name Aditya, and now I will try to invoke this lambda. Okay, I'm pasting it. Now I'm going to click enter. So we got a response, right? We got a response from the lambda like this. And if I do a cat response.json, we'll get what is the response from the lambda. So there we are having some issue in the event. But anyway, we have invoked the lambda from console, and also we invoked lambda from CLA. So this is synchronous invocation of lambda. Now we will have a look of AWS Lambda integrated with load balancer. So we have application load balancer and AWS Lambda integration. So why I am going to tell this, right? Earlier we have seen the synchronous invocation of Lambda with console and CLI, but we can synchronously invoke Lambda by using application load balancer also by integrating Lambda and application load balancer. So how to do that? We'll see now. What if you want to access your Lambda from a website or from an API? So earlier we accessed from a console and CLI. Now the use case is you want to access your Lambda or you want to use Lambda to hit from your custom website or from your API. So how can you do that? So for that you can use ALB. So this is where the ALB come into picture. So here we will expose Lambda as an HTTPS and HTTP endpoint by using ALB. So ALB will convert Lambda as an HTTP and HTTPS endpoint, right? So from the outer world we send HTTPS and HTTP anything. So REST request, then the Lambda in turn takes that the ALB will take that REST request and send to the Lambda, and lambda will send back to the response, and the response has been sent back from the application load balancer to the client. So that is how the ALB will work. Now for asynchronously invoking lambda from the outside world, maybe API calls or from a website, we have two ways. One is using API gateway and the other one is using application load balancer. Now we will have a look at application load balancer. Since we are accessing lambda from the ALB, so we know that ALB must configure a target group. So ALB always look for a target group, and it interacts to the target group where which was configured in the ALB. So we need to configure an target group in the ALB so that ALB will access that target group. Now we are going to add a target group to the lambda so that ALB will communicate to the target group and get the response from the lambda. And okay, here if you see the example, we have clients which are sending HTTP and HTTPS response request to ALB. So ALB is the application load balancer which takes all the requests from the users, and after that it is sending those requests to the target group linked lambda. So this target group is attached to the ALB so that ALB able to access this target group and send response to the lambda which was configured in this target group. Now we know that lambda won't accept any HTTP or HTTPS requests, but what lambda understand is JSON. That is what ALB will do. So ALB will request in JSON. So whatever the response we send in HTTPS, ALB will convert that back to a JSON format and send that request to Lambda. Now Lambda work is it will process that. Since this was an synchronous invocation, after processing Lambda will send response. So Lambda knows only JSON, right? So response also in JSON format, and ALB will take the JSON and convert to the format which will understand by the clients. So since API or website uses HTTP or HTTPS responses, ALB will convert that back to HTTPS response and send back to the clients. This is how ALB and Lambda will be integrated to do the to do the synchronous invocations for the Lambda. Okay, now come, we will integrate Lambda with ALB and see how this integration will work and invoke the Lambda using synchronous invocations. For that, I am going to my AWS console. So I am signing into my console. So once we sign into our console, the first thing we need to do, we need to create a Lambda. So I am going to create my new Lambda function. So I am doing from scratch, and my Lambda function is ALB related Lambda. Okay, ALB Lambda. And I'm using the runtime Node.js itself using 64-bit architecture and creating this function. So this function creation will take some time. Meanwhile, we'll try to open the load balancer. Okay, I'm opening load balancers from the EC2 feature. Okay, my Lambda also created successfully here. Now we'll try to create a load balancer. For that, click on this load balancer, create load balancer. Here I am going to create application load balancer. So I'm creating an application load balancer, and here in the application basic information section, I am giving the name to my application load balancer. This is Lambda related application load balancer, and which is an internet facing, and we are providing IP address type as IPv4. And I'm selecting the available VPC zone. Under I'm selecting all the subnets. So subnets has been selected, and after that we need to add in security group. For security group, I am going to create a new security group now to explain how the traffic flows between the Lambda and application load balancer. We'll see. So we'll give it a name Lambda application load balancer Node.js security group. Okay, and I am going to give some description here. So this security group, now for that we are going to add one inbound rule. So here inbound rule is from all the HTTP. So from HTTP endpoints for any IP address, IPv4 address, we get an hit to this LAM to this application load balancer, or the resource which is using the security group will get into the traffic get into, and outbound rule we are giving, we will send the traffic out to anywhere, even HTTP, TCP, anything. Okay, so like that I'm creating a security group. Now security group created. Now we are going to add the security group to our load balancer. Now here just do a refresh, and you will able to see Lambda ALB Node.js security group. Select this and remove the default one. Okay, we have added the security group. And now in the listeners and routing section, we need to add what ALB to listen. For example, if we get a request from anywhere to the application load balancer, then application load balancer will route request to its listener. So that listener is present in this target group. Now, first we need to select the target group, right? That is the listener. So for that, we are going to create a new target group. So here we have so many target groups available, like instances, IP addresses, Lambda function, application load balancer itself. I'm going to select Lambda function because we are using Lambda, and we have to give name to this target group. So I am going to give name to this target group as ALB Lambda Node.js target group. Okay, and after that I'm going to create next button. Now I'm going to select that Lambda. So the Lambda we need to select is ALB Lambda. So the Lambda has been selected for this target, and we're creating the target group. So the target group has been created. Now we need to add this target group to load balancer. So we're coming back to load balancer and going to refresh here. Since in this listener and routing section, now we are going to add our new target group. Okay, we added our target group, and that's it. We need to do summary. So this is internet facing IPv4, this is the new security group, and these are all subnet mapping, and this is our target group, which is nothing but the Lambda itself, and create load balancer. I have an application load balancer with the same name, so I'm giving another name. So I'm creating this load balancer. So the load balancer now provisioning. So you can able to see the new load balancer Lambda ALB Node.js, and still it is processing. Meanwhile, we can see we can go to Lambda and check. So we have already seen the Lambda, right? How it will be. So I'm opening the index file where we are sending the response. So I'm trying to test now. So for that, as we know, we need to create a test event. I'm going to create an event and I'm going to save this. So we have an event now. I'm going to click on this test and you can able to see, right? We get a response 200. So that is what we mentioned in our file. Okay. Now we'll see once the load balancer up and we'll try to access this URL. So now if you see my load balancer got up, so the status become active. That means the load balancer is up and running. So if I scroll down here, we will get the load balancer ARN and DNS name. I am copying this DNS name. And before that, we are going to see what Lambda will return to us. So here we are sending a response 200 with this hello from Lambda message. We'll see what will happen when I paste this. So when I paste this URL, it is trying to access that Lambda and we got a download here. So the response which Lambda will send, right? This one, we get it as a file. So we'll see what is there in that file. So this is the download. I'm going to open with file. So I'm going to see what is there inside this download. So here it is there, hello from Lambda. The same thing which is there for in our Lambda function. But this is not the way we need. We want to display it like an website. So we'll see how to do that. For that, we just go to internet and check for an article, right? AWS and AWS ALV and Lambda integration, right? And you can able to see my documents. I'm going to see this first document and where we will have the application load balancer request event. So from the load balancer, we will get requests like this. And this is a sample response we can send back from the Lambda. So I'm just copying the sample response and going to our Lambda, right? And now file, the response we are going to change to this new response. So I'm just overwriting that response. Okay. And also I want to print this event. So for that, I'm going to do in console dot log of event. We'll see how the request ALB will look like. Okay, first I'm going to deploy these changes. I'm going to test it. So yeah, it's worked. And in the logs, right, my key value pair has been printed. So that is the event. Okay, the code is now deployed. We'll try to access the ALB once again. Boom. If you see, we're getting hello from Lambda. So this is because here in this response, we mentioned the headers type, content type as text slash HTML. So that's why it's displaying it as an HTML. And we are displaying in H1, so it's displaying in a bold letters. So this is synchronously invoking the Lambda from the application load balancer, right? Application load balancer is an user invoked service. We invoke Lambda from the application load balancer. And if we see, if we go to the monitoring section and see the logs, right, we can see the invocations. So the latest invocation, if I take, it will take us to the CloudWatch logs. We know that Lambda has been integrated with CloudWatch. That was a very good feature for us. And here you can able to see what was the request for this Lambda from ALB. Look, the Elastic Load Balancer has been sent a request with these query string parameters, which is nothing, and with these headers and is body a body with null and is base 4 encoded false, base 64 encoded false, right? So this is the request which is present in this example, right? The same request and the response we are sending back to the Lambda so that the Lambda is displaying like this. So that's it, guys. This is about synchronously invoking the Lambda from application load balancer also. How to invoke Lambda from the console and how to invoke Lambda from the CLA, and how to invoke Lambda from the application load balancer also. That's to synchronously. So now I am going to stop this session from here. For asynchronous way of executing, I will create another video. Up to this part, it contains only synchronous way of invoking the Lambda. And in the next coming video, we are going to see a synchronous invocation of Lambda. So thanks for watching my video. And if you like my video, please do subscribe, share, and like it. And if I need to improve anything, please mention. Thanks for watching my video.